I'd like to welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be welcoming you here today in our third Executive MBA talk. My name is Lida. I manage recruitment and admissions here at RSM for our Executive MBA programs. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today. I see many familiar names in the attendees list, people that have been in touch with us one way or another. But if this is your first interaction with the school, you couldn't have picked a better event. So it's great to have you here. The RSM Executive MBA Talk Series is an initiative that we introduced earlier this year. It's an opportunity to bring attention to topics that relate to key concepts explored by our students during our Executive MBA programs. These concepts relate to business concepts, topics that relate to personal leadership competencies. And in order to do that, we tap into the knowledge and expertise of the vast array of professionals that are connected with RSM in one way or another, academic and professional staff members, alumni, and so on. Today, we are welcoming Diniz, Career Development Manager at RSM and former recruiter, who will share her insights on the do's and don'ts on personal branding from a recruiter's perspective. The discussion is moderated by our very own Brandon Kirby, Director of MBA Marketing and Admissions. Brandon was our speaker in our first Executive MBA talk on public speaking and presentation skills design, and we're glad to have him here again today as a moderator of this event. And with that, I hand it over to you, Brandon.
Excellent, Lida. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and hello to everyone who's joined us this afternoon from wherever you happen to be logging in from. We really enjoy this series because it's really focused on different skills that we feel that professionals should have in order to be successful in their careers. And this evening is no different. As Lida mentioned, with us tonight is, I learned earlier today, Diana, since you were named after Princess Di. So Diana.
Thanks for sharing that, Brandon.
Hey, nothing wrong. Hey, nothing's sacred with me, right? You're gonna share.
I know.
You have more than 12 years of experience in the recruitment area, having worked for Randstad for nearly 10 years. Randstad, of course, being one of the major players in the HR recruiting space here in the Netherlands, but also around the world. Most recently, you joined RSM, where you act as a career coach, where you really utilize your consulting, your recruitment consulting experience to help our students sort of play the game, as you call it, because I think you do say that recruitment is a game. And you've worked with a lot of large global clients from different industries, from junior all the way to senior executive level. And also, I think a big congratulations, because you've also recently started your own sort of project on the side called Career Gem, that's also looking to help business professionals to become their better selves and to really identify the talent that they have within. So welcome and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Brandon. Very happy to be here today.
Well, excellent. We've already taken care of our introductions. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items in a minute. With the agenda after that, we're going to talk about the recruiting game. We're going to talk about going from an MCP, which we'll explain later, to an MVP, get into some key takeaways, and then, of course, also take your questions along the way. I would say that is one critical part of our webinar series, is that we really want you to be engaged with us. We don't want this to be a one-way conversation for the duration of the presentation. So please use the Q&A box, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. When you hover over the bottom, you'll see that there will be an area called Q&A, which will allow you to type in your questions. We do have quite a number of you in the audience tonight, so I would ask that you put your questions in the Q&A box as opposed to the chat window. It just makes it easier for me as a moderator to bring your questions live into the chat. That's typically the easiest way to do that. In addition, we're also going to be doing several polls throughout the evening to get your opinions and your thoughts on different topics. So just to test it out, I'm going to put our first one of the evening up, which is going to ask two questions, actually. The first question is, when was the last time you Googled yourself? Your choices are this week, this month, in the past 3 months, past year, or never. What is Google anyway? And then also the second question, of course, is how often do you review your CV and make changes? Do you do it frequently? Do you do it sometimes, but only when searching for a job, rarely, or never? So we're going to let those go for just a moment, and we'll come back to the responses to that before we move forward. So again, use the Q&A box, and please ask your questions throughout the presentation. We will bring them in during the presentation itself. Of course, we will allow for time for Q&A at the end, but if you have a burning question that you want to add to the conversation, please do so. So great, we have nearly 80% of you who have voted, so let's go ahead and end the poll, and let's share the results here. So Diana, the first question was, when was the last time you Googled yourself? And it seems to be the winning answer was within the past year. So when you see that, does that align with what you see with a lot of the people you work with? Is that more or less? And maybe more importantly, how often should we be Googling ourselves and taking a look to see what the internet has to say about us?
Well, I think that I'm surprised. 42% is a pretty big number. I coach people that haven't Googled themselves ever, or since their last job. So depending on how long they've been there, maybe 10 years. So the frequency, I think it's interesting to Google yourself every year. I'm not saying every month, and that's not necessary, but it does depend. I mean, if you're listening today and you do interviews, or, your name is mentioned in some reports of your company, then it's important to Google yourself and see what comes up. It could be really a deal breaker. I always Google the people that I interviewed. That's the first thing I do. So know that, at least. Yeah.
What about social media? Do you check out social media profiles as well?
Well, when I Google, that's the thing. If you Google yourself and your Facebook isn't, blocked, then I'll find a lot of things. So I won't go specifically to social media. I'll just Google and everything pops up. There's a lot of magic there.
There's a lot of things out there that you may or may not be aware of. So it's important to do that. The second question here was, of course, how often do you review your CV and make changes? It seems to be, again, with 57% of the votes saying that they sometimes do it, but typically only when they're searching for a job. So what's your reaction to that? What advice would you give, or what would you say when you see that particular answer?
Well, Brandon, you know that I'm pretty direct. I mean, I'm Dutch, so, I think then you're too late. You're not going to get the job. You know why? When you start, making your CV changes, and CV, that means LinkedIn today as well, but your CV change when you're going to search for a job, you're too late. The magic happens when someone meets you and says, hey, I think you're great for my company. Send over your CV. And then they're suddenly stressed to brand yourself, and then the quality just goes down. So yes, sometimes, but mostly when I'm searching for a job, 80% of the people answer that. So, it's not bad. It's just good that you're here today.
I think like most things in life, it's a lot about preparation. So you want to make sure that your CV is ready when you don't need it, so that when you do need it, you don't have to spend time getting it up to speed. It's something that I've always heard as well. So I think that's similar to what you're suggesting there. Now, as we think about the topic of today, we're talking a lot about personal branding. In the setup for this webinar, we had quite a few conversations about what content we wanted to share and what approach we wanted to take. And you had an interesting story of how you went from the recruitment game, and you have referred to it as a game, and I think you'll touch upon that throughout the conversation this evening, but how you went from recruitment to coaching, and what along that journey really highlighted for you the importance of personal branding? And then afterwards, we can get into kind of a definition. So maybe talk to us about that transition and some of the things that you saw in that transition.
So when I was recruiting, it happened a lot of times that I got 200 applications for one vacancy. It's not different today. And what happened, I would reject a lot of them. When I had 5 or 10 solid candidates, I would reject the rest. And some of those candidates that were applying actually called me back to get feedback on the reason why I rejected them. And then I would look at their CV so I could give them feedback one-on-one. And I noticed that I was talking to this wonderful, potential talent for the company I was recruiting for. But there was, it wasn't connecting. I looked at the CV and I had a completely different person on the phone that I would actually invite for an interview. And this happened a lot. That also defined me as a recruiter in my career, that I didn't really look at CVs anymore. I did, of course, at the experience, but I would call just to make sure. And then I thought, I'm really allergic and when people waste their talents, also in companies with talent development. And I started to dig into personal branding. And that's why, I'm here today. And I feel like there's a really, gap between the recruiters game and how the recruiters look at it and how professionals brand themselves.
And how we think it happens. I mean, to that point, we could treat it as a question to the audience, but I'll ask it to you first. How often, or not how often, but how long does the average recruiter look at a particular CV? I mean, what is the amount of time? I can imagine when you're placing for a role, you're looking at hundreds of profiles and CVs, as you mentioned, to come up with a short list of a few people to provide the client. How long do you spend on the CV? And what made me think about it is you mentioned giving personal feedback for those people that were rejected, which I'm not sure many recruiters would probably even do. So it's special that you would even do that. But how long do most recruiters spend on a CV?
So to answer your first question, how long? An average of 30 seconds max. To answer, to give a bit of info on that, and not a lot of recruiters give feedback. The story behind is not a lot of people call.
Fair enough.
So, I maybe from the 200 applicants, maybe 8 would call me, and this is just me guessing, but yeah. And then I would give feedback. So
fair enough. You can't be told no if you don't ask, I suppose.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about the definition itself of personal branding. And you've got something you wanted me to share that I think highlights sort of what you feel about personal branding. I'm putting it here on screen, saying the conscious and intentional effort to create and influence public perception of an individual by positioning them as an authority within their industry. So it's elevating their credibility and differentiating themselves from the competition, ultimately to advance their career and increase their circle of influence and have a larger impact. So maybe unpack that a little bit for us and talk about what this means to you.
So, as you said, I see recruitment as a game. And what I like about the game of recruitment, but especially the personal branding part, so, from the application part and people looking for a new challenge, is that you consciously and intentionally can influence people with your brand. And what it means to me is that everyone that's in the call today, I see 124 participants, have a brand already out there. Are you using it? Are you using it to influence people? And that's what personal branding means to me. You can differentiate yourself by just being aware that you have a personal brand and what you want that to be.
So we have a question here from the audience that's saying, great points. How do you show your personal brand on a CV? Maybe it's the design, but are there some tips beyond grammar or showing action or results, which are standard tips? How do you show your personal brand on a CV?
How do you show your personal brand on a CV? I think that we're going to get to that in a second, but one of the things is definitely, so actually that's the next topic. So thank you for bridging that to the next slide. But, the personal brand always has to do with the look and feel of a CV. So let me tell you a story about someone I've coached that had a PhD, was a professor, and wanted to go in consultancy, right? And the CV looked very academic. And when I say this, I think everyone has a certain idea when it comes to an academic CV. And just by creating a different layout, changing some words, so the content stays the same, but you start talking in a different language, that's the personal brand that you want to show. So it's really a feeling that you get. And my biggest tip there is don't go with the mainstream, go with the format that works for you. That represents you.
Excellent. There's a follow-up question to that, and I'll let you speak on the next slide, and maybe you can tie it in. The follow-up question is specifically to applicant tracking systems, that are looking for certain things. How can you, use your personal brand there? So we'll move on to the next part here, which is talking about the 30, which we referred to a little earlier, but also maybe thinking about how someone can stand out from an ATS system.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so, what I wanted to say here, going back to the question that I just answered is, so a recruiter game is a 30-second game. You look at it in 30 seconds, either you see something that's interesting or not. And what a recruiter is looking for when they look at it is, number one, look the part. What I mean with this is, and I will show you exactly what I mean, and I hope everyone can see it when I do this, is that you'll see my picture right now.
Yes, we do.
And then you invite me for the interview, and you see a completely different person. So I always do this when I'm talking about personal branding because it gets someone triggered or off their game. So look the part means think about the look and feel you want to give, but also be, coherent with your brand. If you want to go into consultancy, look the part. How do consultancy CVs look like? If you want to go into leadership position, do you call your about me a summary or an executive summary? These are little things about the look and feel of the things. Do you put a picture on the CV or not? That's a question I got a lot of times. It's up to you. I know in the Netherlands and in Europe, it's mostly used to put a picture on because it also makes you look the part and differentiate yourself from other candidates. So that's when it comes to number one. And I do feel that there's a difference between CV and LinkedIn. And I want to, go through these steps. CV, just told you a bit about it. A recruiter looks 30 seconds at your CV. 10 seconds, are you looking the part? The second, do you act the part? And 3, what is your unique selling point? That's on a part of the CV. On the LinkedIn, a recruiter normally takes a bit more time because you're scrolling around, right? So the first thing a recruiter would look like on your LinkedIn is your name, and immediately under the name, your title, in the sense of, is your recent position there? And if it's your recent position and the position that you're into now, you want to move on, then put in some words that actually trigger your future position. If I see a project manager and you want to be a director for supply chain and you have only project manager, I would suggest you to put on LinkedIn project manager, supply chain, leadership. So that's how look the part. That's what I mean by that. Act the part means the language. So in some companies and industries, they talk about stakeholders. Others talk about internal clients. So get to know the language of the industry you want to go to, or, the next position you want to go to. So really, walk the walk and act the part. And then your unique selling point. And this is a difficult one in the sense of when a recruiter looks at your CV, in the summary, you can tell me that you're a professional with 12 years of experience in operations. I have 20 other candidates that have the same experience. So what are you bringing to the table? And when we're talking about leadership positions, I don't want to know, what you're doing. I want to know what your leadership style is. Like, how do you how do you convince people? How do you deal with people? How do you think about strategy? So what are you bringing to me in transferable skills? And that's the summary about me or executive summary part. And that ties into the first question. How can you show on your CV your personal brand? Is the intro to your CV. That's your personal brand. Did I answer your questions, Brandon?
That's great.
Any questions from the crowd?
I think so. There's more coming. Don't worry. We've got plenty more. There's a couple kind of around the LinkedIn sort of connection to your CV. Yeah. How aligned should they be? This question is asking about both content, but also your profile picture. Should they be the same? Should they be different? Does it matter? What are your thoughts on about the alignment between a CV and LinkedIn?
So I would actually say, if you're going to buy a product, and you buy the product this week, and then next week it does completely different. What are you looking for? You're looking normally for, everyone says they like change, but when it comes to recruiting people, they want a trustworthy brand that stays a bit the same, that's stable. So for me, it means use the same picture overall. So I know your LinkedIn is the same as your CV. So this is when you create a brand. A brand is about being coherent and showing the same things over and over again.
So it's
also
about
sorry, Brendan.
Consistency, you're saying.
Consistency all over, yeah. When it comes to the content, the CV should be a 1-2 pager where you can go all out on your LinkedIn. So I always say take the best parts that you want to show on your CV. What are the best parts? The responsibilities that you feel that match the best for your future job. On your LinkedIn, put as much information on there as you can. And in the summary, add your CV in there.
Makes sense. One more question at this point, kind of around CVs. I'm kind of combining two questions. One is asking about, the traditional approach for a one-page CV versus a multiple-page CV. So maybe some thoughts on that. And then another question kind of related to that talks about, looking at there are a lot of design templates and CV templates that are out there. What is your take on some of this person is saying the non-standard design-oriented templates? Does it matter? Does it not matter? So how long should it be? One page, is that still the golden rule? And also, what about design elements?
Okay. I think a very important one is in design elements, design should work for you. So if you're making a transition, a lot of the people that pursue an MBA at RSM want to change one of the things, either, function or industry. So I think it's important that in the designing that you show that you guide the reader towards something you want them to see first. And that's how you use design. So I have some that actually use a design where the summary really pops out because they don't have the experience yet, but they do want to make that switch. Others want to build on their previous experience. So they want to show the experience first because they've been in the FMCG industry, let's say. So that's what they want to showcase first. So I would say choose a design thinking about where do I want the reader to go to first, and then pick the design.
And about the length, does that matter?
So the length, so this is the thing. And I think that's going to be in our next, the next slide that I want to share as well. So great crowd. I love this.
We're getting you from one place to the next. So.
I'm getting really excited about this. So what you see is that in the length, so we talked about MCP because I refer to the recruitment as a game. And of course, a lot of people know most valuable player, MVP. So I named this one the MCP, as in the most common profile. What a lot of people do that are in a leadership position, looking to the next step or want to go into a leadership position, is that they show you show what you did and you show all of it. So in that sense, you're not differentiating yourself if you have a 3-4 page CV. Some of you may have 15, 20 years of experience, other will have 8. So I wouldn't say one pager when you have like 15 years of experience. But if you could do it in one page, as a leader, you should bottom line everything. And that's why you get hired as well, to, communicate something simple that is complicated. So that's the first part of your CV. Can you do that already? So for me personally, it's max 2 pages. I know in the US, for example, a 1 page is the way to go. So depending on where you want to apply, look at what's normal there. But for me, a 2 page is max. When and any of my recruiter network colleagues will say 3 pages, it's out immediately.
Excellent. So anything else you want to say about the most common profile and determining the right of what to show and what not to show? Is there anything else you'd like to speak on this particular topic?
Yeah, and someone asked a question like, how do you your personal brand in the bullet points? And the most common profile always shows in the bullet points, your task and responsibilities about what you did. When you're in, when you have 10 years of experience or more, I or a hiring manager, we don't really want to know what you did. We know what you did. We saw the function. We want to know how you did it, with whom you collaborated, and the results. Because that shows your transferable skills. And when looking into senior jobs, I think any hiring manager, recruiter is confident that you can do the job. They just want to know if you're the right match to bring the team to the next level. So I think that's very important when it comes to most common profile. And of course, the most common mistakes that people make when sending their CV or updating their CV.
Makes sense. We're talking about how to stand out on the CV. We're going to put another poll question out into the group here, which is going to ask you, when was the last time you interviewed outside of your organization? So this is not for an internal role that you were going for. Within the past month, within the past 3 months, past 6 months, more than 6 months ago, or I have yet or have not interviewed outside of my current organization. So we're going to let that go for just a moment. Diana, what are your thoughts on telling people, how often, should we be testing the market to see, what our value is and what is our marketability? I think that's oftentimes something you get comfortable in a role and you don't think about things until something pushes you to think about it, whether that's something happening in the marketplace, whether that happens with a merger. So while we're waiting for these results to come in, and I'll close the poll in just a moment, what are your thoughts about, interviewing outside of your organization? Why should you do it, even if you're not looking actively for another role? Maybe talk to us about that a little bit.
So I will tell you a personal story of myself. So I don't know if my director is here today as a participant, but I interview every year, at least once. I'm really happy in my job. I'm not looking for something else. Why I'm doing this is when I worked at Randstad for 10 years, I got the opportunity to interview for RSM. And my first interview as a recruiter, 10 years, prepping people for interviews, my interview wasn't that great at RSM. And why? In the organization I work with, people came to me saying, hey, I have this position. Do you want to work for me? So I showcase already what I was worth. And then suddenly I had to tell someone else why they should hire me. And that was something I never thought about because people were coming to me. So when it comes to that, Brandon, I really feel that it's like, you do your car, you go to an inspection to check if your car is okay. And every year you do that. I look at it the same way. Get a check. How good are you in interviewing at the moment? And what's your market value? Because don't forget, if you get through the second round or you get an offer, you can negotiate on your current salary. So, it's a win-win there. I mean, one, it gets you prepped. You have nothing to lose. So you're much more relaxed in interviews because you have a job and, you're good. And you can test your market values. So I think it's a win-win, at least for yourself in this one. Yeah.
So I'll put the results out here in just a moment. Any guesses on what the biggest response was? Was it within the past month, 3 months, 6 months, more than 6 months, or I have not interviewed outside of my organization? Which one do you think is going to be the most popular answer? Put you on the spot.
Do I have to choose one?
Yeah, well, they had to choose one. You have to choose one too.
Okay. I would say more than 6 months ago. We don't have more than a year ago, right? No, then it's more than 6 months ago. Yeah.
You are truly a professional who knows her craft. That is true. It was a little bit more evenly split, but about 40% of people said they did so more than 6 months ago. Interestingly, about 30%, almost 30 people that voted, have done it within the past month.
Wow.
So I don't know if that's just market dynamics at play or, if they were forced to do so, but there's quite a number of people. So I guess maybe that is a little surprising to you, perhaps, to see that many people have interviewed within the past month for a role outside of their own company.
It is. I'm surprised. At the same time, what you're saying, I don't know if it's the current, the market, the current development in the world. So I'm surprised, but I'm really happy about it. You see me smiling because I feel like, and you're here. It's an EMBA talk. I can imagine you want to develop your growth, professional growth. So I should have known that there would be more people leaning towards that as well, I guess. But definitely surprising. But I think that's the way to go. Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Well, we're going to keep moving here. We have a lot of great questions in the chat. Don't worry. We have plenty of time at the end. So if I don't bring it in immediately to the conversation, I see them coming in. So we've got a lot of great questions for Diana to cover. But we just talked about the most common profile, which was the MCP that we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So how can someone go from having the MCP to the MVP, right? The most valuable profile. What are ways that people can transition from, being part of the pack to the one who's starting to stand out? What are your thoughts on that?
So, I already mentioned some things, but I'm going to go from CV to LinkedIn again. I think it's easier for you guys to just follow me. So, when you want to be an MVP and you're an MCP right now, show how you did it. I already said it. So and what I mean by it is you have some bullet points on your CV. What are the most important ones? Choose the ranking of your bullet points. Sometimes the most valuable bullet points are the last ones in your current position. So, showcase those first and showcase how you did it. So if you're a finance manager, you can explain me what you did, but leave it until the end. I want to know, did you coordinate? Did you coordinate with senior management? Did you advise senior management or consult, or, were you part of the strategy team? How many people did you lead? How many projects did you do? What was the results? So for me, the results and who you worked with, and for any recruiter that is doing senior level positions, that's where the magic happens. And that's where you go from being mainstream to being a valuable player and profile.
I think you mentioned that's also half of the equation, because just because you make the first hurdle of becoming the final set that is submitted ultimately to your client, what about a hiring manager? I mean, because the CV has to obviously impress the recruiter enough to be able to make the cut. But then not every person you submit is going to be interviewed necessarily. So are there any differences with what hiring managers might be looking for in your experience? And if so, what are some of those differences?
I think that so a hiring manager will always say what they're looking for, and a recruiter will look for that on the CV. However, I think when it comes to interviewing, that you will have a completely different interview from the recruitment to the hiring manager. And if you guys interviewed the last 3 months, you will know that if there was a recruiter in play. Because what they look for is, how do you communicate? Like, the ability to process a lot of data and communicate So during an interview, they will test you on that. They will test you on how you deal with leadership. What's your leadership style? Those are the things that they want to know. So what they will be looking at a CV where I will swiftly look 10 seconds like, hey, I have your unique selling point. I like it. A leader will go into, hey, it's in your summary. You say you're a servant leader. Great. Don't see it in the bullet points. Okay. And then they go to LinkedIn. Yeah, great leaders share content. Where's your content? So that's how it works. If the next position you're in or you want to go to, you need to act like it now, or no one will see you that way. And that's when it comes to personal branding, is being that brand already to get into that next position.
And so as you're reviewing CVs, oftentimes you'll do a quick informational with the person just to get a chance to speak with them ahead of, to see who the person is, right? You mentioned that earlier, sometimes that, the CV was not strong, but enough to intrigue you. But when you spoke with them, it was a wow. And then I'm sure there have been other moments where the CV was really strong and you got on the phone with them and you're like, there's a disconnect between who I'm speaking to and who I see on the page here. Yeah. Any thoughts or anything you would like to share maybe about when you're having that conversation, the initial conversation with a recruiter? What should the approach be? What things should a candidate think about or highlight? Any pointers that you'd like to give?
I think so. Actually, the first thing, and this is really what I'm saying, I hope you don't speak to the recruiter, but directly to the hiring manager. So I say skip HR and recruitment as much as you can. So, that's one thing. But if you are talking to a recruiter, it really depends if they're in-house or an external party. What happens when you're an external party? So let's talk about that Randstad, Michael Page of these worlds. A recruiter will call you and you need to be prepared for it. So some of you have interviewed 3 months ago and some of you may be applying for 10 positions at this moment. When I call you, I need to feel, special, that you're on top of your game. So when I call and I say, hey, it's me, you applied for this position, immediately there has to be a story that you can tell and that I know that you know why I'm calling you. And this is a common mistake. Because this is only testing how quick you are on your feet. And that's something you need today and every day. And that's what a lot of hiring managers expect. So either my biggest tip is if you're not prepared, just say, hey, thank you so much for your call. Can I call you in a half hour or can I call you at 4 o'clock? So you can just regather your thoughts and make great first impression. I prefer that and any recruiter than that your story is not on point at that moment, and maybe, you know, you're not showcasing your talent. Another thing is, tell me about yourself. That's the question. So, hey, I got your CV, you know, and then they'll ask, you know, why you're interested in a position. Why are you looking to leave your current position? That's always a question that's asked. And then from there, they will do a pre-screening, and I will be like, this is a nice person to talk to. And then I will actually schedule in a real interview with you. So I think the first contact moment, Brandon, is essential to get you to the interview with the recruiter. And that means either you have a great story already prepared or build in time to be called back.
So some preparation probably makes sense. So write it on a note card and keep it in your pocket in case someone calls, so you have it ready to go. We've got a lot of great questions coming in. So let's talk about some key takeaways from some of the things that you've mentioned this evening up to this point. So we'll kind of go through those. So I'll sort of let you go. Here we go. Key takeaways.
Define your core audience. And this gets back to your unique selling points. You need to know where you want to go to next and who your audience is. Only then can you influence the readers. So if you don't know who your readers are right now, that's the first thing I would advise you to do. Okay, where do I want to go next? And then define your core audience. That makes it easy for the unique selling points. So then you start going from the NCP to the MVP place. When you look at your bullet points, your summary, you know what they want to hear. So that's the second one.
Oh, this one's out of order. That's my mistake, but constantly bringing your future self to your audience.
Yeah, so bring your future self. And one of the things I really want to highlight here, and I mentioned it maybe too briefly, on LinkedIn, you know, I can imagine you're in a stable job right now. Are you going to change this is my hiring, is my director going to look at it, etc. No one, it's hard to say this, no one is really busy with your profile except you. Or people that are hiring for something. So don't worry about that. As long as you put your current position in your title, that's fine. And then the other ones should be really focused on the future where you want to go to next. Because if a recruiter lands on your page and your title says something that's not resonating or matching what they're looking for, they're out. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, you can also turn off those notifications, but for LinkedIn, for those updates. But yeah, absolutely. How about the next one? Build your community. Build your community.
So that's networking. And what I mean by it is, you define your core audience, you determine unique selling point, and then you're building your community for your future role. Talk to people, what's important, what's happening in the industry, what's important, learn the language that they speak. It's funny when you go to a networking event, I can see immediately when someone comes to me that they're a consultant, because consultants talk in a certain way. They have a very methodical way of answering questions. So if you're going into that, learn that, speak to them and notice how they speak or, how they approach certain things. So build your community and network. Your network is gold. And what we said, consistency, so career and brand along all media. You signed up for this, you saw me, and then and maybe you were like, is this the same person? You don't want people to have that. You want people to listen to what you want to say and what you can bring, instead of being off their game because you look differently on every CV or LinkedIn or any other social media you're using.
Well, excellent. So I think that's a kind of a great sort of jumping off point, because as you can imagine, we've accumulated quite a number of questions on a wide variety of topics in and around the recruitment hiring game. So I'm just going to start working through them, shall we?
Yeah.
So the first one is asking about, is a motivational letter, is it still relevant? Do recruiters read motivational letters, especially since you mentioned that CVs are only looked at for 30 seconds? Do they look at motivational letters? What are your thoughts on that? What's your take on that?
Okay, so just to bring a nuance in, so recruiter looks 30 seconds. That's the first screen. So 30 seconds, and then you have the pile of the CVs that pass the 30 seconds, and then you actually go thoroughly through it. So that's one of the things. And then Brandon, what was the question? Sorry.
Well, the question was asking, are they still relevant? Do people still read them because they're going through it so quickly?
So if I have this pile, right, you pass the 30 seconds, then I'm going to go through them, and then I have these top 10. A lot of hiring managers don't want to interview with 10 people for one position. So what I will do then is I will look at a cover letter or motivational letter. And that's when I make the decision. So if you would say, do people still read them? Yes. Do they read them first? No. Bottom lining this, if your CV isn't great, they will never read your cover letter. Or great, if your CV isn't good enough, then they won't read your cover letter. And some companies, and the biggest one in these worlds, really do think, and the most important thing is motivation to work for the company. So you will know that immediately when you see it. A lot of companies don't use cover letters anymore, but if they were requesting it, you can really bet on it that they're going to read it. Yeah.
What about there's some questions here that revolve around customization, and it can be, I'm sure, challenging if you are actively seeking for a position and applying for multiple that do require, a motivational or a cover letter. And we see this even with essays for the MBA program. It's a common sort of, it's alluring to try to have one letter, that rules them all, that you use across everything. What's your thoughts on, customization, how much should be customizable? I mean, what's really practical given, where's the balance in that?
Okay, so I will give you the answer that I normally give the MBAs when I do workshops on tailor making their cover letters. So the politically correct answer would be you tailor make every cover letter. Now, we know that job searching, cover letters, CVs is not a really great thing to be doing. So yes, tailor make every cover letter. And then my answer towards that as a person and a recruiter is make sure that you only need a template. Why you? And why this position? That could be always the same. I mean, why you? When you're an executive, it's always about the transferable skills. So that won't change. And if you're going for the same positions or kind of the same functions, then you don't need to change why the position either. The only thing you always need to change is why the company. So my advice would always be tailor make the why the company. And I would always start with that in your cover letter. And then why the position and why you're the best fit. What are you bringing to the company?
Go ahead.
Cover letters. Please don't repeat your CV. We have your CV. So, so if you have a very great project that you couldn't showcase enough on your CV, that's a different thing. But if you're going to tell me that, you worked at an FMCG company as the project manager for 5 years in your cover letter, okay, so there's nothing new there, right? So I think that why the company always triggers because it's very personal and will show your personal brand. So that's on that.
You mentioned earlier there was an example of someone who, when we asked you about the design of a CV, and you mentioned someone had a particular design that highlighted their motivation and about them because they didn't have a lot of skills that sort of were relevant for that new industry or new position. So one of the questions here is saying, when changing industries and you have a limited amount of transferable skills, how can you differentiate yourself from the competition when applying for the job? I mean, is it still possible to do so? How do you do it? Is it just too difficult? I mean, how would you respond to someone saying, hey, listen, I want to move into consulting. I've been in marketing my entire career. How can I highlight skills that might help me to at least get my foot in the door so that I can go in and try to win in the interview?
So I think that there's a difference between the traditional applying, so applying online via LinkedIn or any other job portal, or doing the one that has most effect but takes the longest, and that's networking. Someone will look at your CV if one of their top consultants says, hey, I know someone in my network, you should look at it. Maybe the CV isn't quite right, but I know it's the right person. So for us, networking goes above everything, even, so that's the non-traditional applying. When it comes to traditional applying, if you don't have the transferable skills and you're not in that industry, think about what you're bringing to them. So it's very important that a lot of people think, the first thing they see is, I don't match with 5 of these bullet points. Instead of thinking, why don't I match? Why would I then be good for the team? Because you will be a different person than the whole team. And that's what you need to showcase then. So what are you bringing in that you know for sure that the rest of the people don't have in the team, and ranking those bullet points that way. At the end of the day, it's going to be difficult. We're at this moment in the market, we're seeing that there are more applications going. It's more competitive in the market. So that is the thing. So that's why I would say network. Really.
That sounds like having a plan. It's not something that you can do necessarily in a week. You have to know that you want to move towards this. And that goes back, I think, to what you were saying also about learning the language of that industry as well, so that you're making sure you're including that language in your cover letter, that you're also including it if you're in the interview as well, but having a plan and working towards that, building a network, going to events, even if it might be virtually at the moment, but that's something there. Yeah.
And, Brandon, also know what's happening in the industry. What are their pain points? Like, no one wants to hire someone that is just doing their job. At this moment, everyone is hiring, it's the same thing if you're buying a product. I go back to that. Like when I'm buying a product, I will look at what is this product going to offer me, and what I see in cover letters sometimes is like, I really want to work for your company because, I like a challenge and I like to develop myself. I'm not looking to help you. You need to help me. I'm hiring talent, So I think that's very important to really know what's happening in industry. So your cover letter is solid, that you really know their pain points and say, hey, I know this is happening here and this is what I can bring.
What about skills? Is the question, should we include skills or is it better to give examples rather than listing the skills? I mean, oftentimes you see that, off to the side or at the bottom where it's the skills. What's your thought on, does it have an impact? Does it matter? Is it a nice to have if it can take you from like a 9 to a 9.5, or is it not relevant? What's your thoughts on that?
So I go back to walk the walk. So for me, it's just talking when you put it in skills. And it depends on the skills, right? I mean, some of you may have, are digital native. That is, one of the things that a lot of people are looking for right now, how digitalization is impacting the business. So a lot of hiring managers are looking for that. So if that's one of the things, I would mention it, but it should show in your bullet points. I'm not a fan of skills. I can look at them, but then I'll immediately refer back to your CV and seeing where you're showcasing them. So, but that's a very personal opinion. So, yeah. And when it comes to, Brandon, at the beginning, and I don't think I answered it. I didn't think I answered it, but it's about artificial intelligence or these systems, selecting the CVs. So a lot of people put it in because they feel like they're going through this machine that will count your words. I have to be honest, a lot of global clients I work with still do it manually, like the biggest ones. So we're talking about AI and about these recruitment bots. Most of them are with external hiring firms like Randstad. They had that. But I think still to today, there are a lot of companies that don't have that. And if they do, then maybe this could be a way of, putting some words in. But then you pass the recruit bot and I'm the recruiter and I see you don't have experience or you're not showcasing it, and then you're out anyway. So it's really, I think when it comes to the words, LinkedIn, yes, name as many words as you can. If you're here in the session today, you can go to my LinkedIn profile, click on it and see the words that I have down. Brandon is laughing because this is something I advise everyone to do every time. Look at it.
Me too.
And Brandon too, yeah. So have a look at how we, beat the system. But that has to do with LinkedIn. They have this search engine, but it comes to recruiting for, the biggest companies here, still manual.
Well, that's good to know. So the human touch is still alive and well.
Yeah.
Here's one, especially that's relevant perhaps, now. Does being in between jobs or even broader, having, an employment gap, does that diminish your chances with recruiters? Or is there a good way to, this person is saying brand that time, so to speak, on your CV? So what about employment gaps or sabbaticals or just, experience gaps? How do you look at that? Is there anything you can really do, or is it pretty much you're going to have to, again, use the network and try to come in through a different door?
So I'll just give an example and answer it as well. So answer is more than a year gap always did get me thinking. Most of people name it a sabbatical. So that's at least like, someone on purposely took a gap, and that's fine. I'll tell you, Sir, someone I spoke to yesterday that had a gap for 5 years. and this person decided to be a stay-at-home dad. But this person also felt like, I'm a stay-at-home dad. How am I going to sell this? Like, I don't know. The question is, what did this person, and I asked it, what did you get out of it? How did, being a stay-at-home dad for 5 years made you a better professional? And that's how you should showcase it. So, when there is a gap, try to connect, put in sabbatical or write down the result of it, what skills you acquired during that sabbatical. And I think that's important. But more than a year is always, the positive now is that you're immediately available. And a lot of people forget that. Like, companies are looking always for someone yesterday and never for someone in 6 months. No. So that's still a thing. So that's a positive. You're immediately available. So showcase that immediately available and put it in your cover letter. In your CV is not good. You cannot really highlight it that much. So write in your cover letter what it gave you and what's going to give the company.
And I think that's a great point. Looking at something that maybe has a negative connotation to it, but trying to find not even a positive way to spin it, but that is a positive. Hey, I have been a stay-at-home father for 5 years, but I'm ready to come back to the workforce. I'm still just as talented as I was before. And guess what? I can start tomorrow. So I think there's definitely value in that. Kind of a related question is asking, what about people who have changed their jobs a lot? This person says, really a lot. Nothing wrong with that. But they did stay in a specific sector. When you have 20 plus years of experience and perhaps 20 plus jobs that you've worked for with different companies, has that philosophy changed? Because I know, historically, it used to be, you don't want to be seen as a job hopper. You need to have some commitment, at least 12 to 18 months, blah, blah, blah. But the world changes, or maybe has it changed? What is that, what does that trigger in your mind when you see a lot of job hopping? And if that is the case, is there anything that someone can do to overcome that, either in their cover letter or in their personal statement at the top? What are your thoughts on that?
I have to laugh, but it's because it's exactly right. 10 years ago, people would be like job hopper, and now nowadays people would be like, oh, interesting. Someone wants to showcase more. Of course, this person really had a lot of jumps. So let's talk about the really, really a lot of jumps, extreme things. I think that it's good that there's consistency in the industry. And if there's consistency in your roles, and I mean, like, if you're in a certain industry and you've always been in the marketing space and supply chain space, let's say two completely different things, but you were in those two, then showcase it differently, right? Marketing, let's say marketing manager from 2008 to now, or 2000 to now, and then name all the companies you did it at. And then what was the main project you worked on, or what was the main result there? That shows consistency as well, and less job hopping. This is for the really extreme cases, at least. Yeah.
And again, looking at the positives, yes, you might have worked at a lot of companies, but you've seen a lot of company culture. You've probably had a lot of experience. Maybe you saw a merger or an acquisition. Maybe you went through a reorg. You worked at a really large company of 50,000. Maybe you worked at a small company of 100. You learned something in each of those positions along the way. Now, you might not always be able to showcase that within a CV, but when you get in the interview, you can definitely use that as a strength. Just be prepared to answer why you move so much, because I would look at it as a person who hires people. I would ask, well, you did move around a lot. Was it, what was that? What was the reason? Because there usually is a reason. Just my personal perspective, for what it's worth.
And where are you going in a leadership position, Brandon, as well, right? We know, you're a director. Any company for leadership wants at least someone to stay in a position for a longer time, because you're really building something. You're working on the strategy of the company. So I think for leadership positions especially, it's important to showcase it. Yeah. So
perhaps maybe early in your career, moving around doesn't send off as many red flags, because you're figuring out what you like, where you're good, what your passion is, so to speak. But at some point, people like to see that you stay on the same track for a little while to sort of complete what you were asked to come in and do. Is that not a good statement? Okay. Yeah. What about, quick question, might even do it with a yes or no. Is it a good idea to send applications or your CV to hiring managers in addition to recruiters? So if you know that a recruiter is recruiting for a position, you happen to know that there's a hiring manager there, do you send it to both at the same time? Does it have any effect or not really?
The hiring manager will forward it back to the recruiter because that's why they have a recruiter in place. So no, but yes, if you know who the hiring manager is, then reach out to the hiring manager and ask some really great questions.
Let's see here. I'm just scrolling through the other questions. Again, we have a lot of great ones. Keep them coming in. What about here's a question saying, can you give your thoughts regarding applicants who might not be from that particular country? So this person is saying, any thoughts regarding foreigner applicants? What do you look for in their CV and motivation letters? And so maybe we can do this in two ways. I can speak from personal experience. When I was younger, I really wanted to move to the UK. I knew no one there. Back in those days, it was monster.co.uk. There I was, helplessly sending my CV to anyone who would look at it. And I can imagine people are like, oh, this guy's in the US. I'm not even going to consider that person. Is that the way it is? Do people consider applicants from other countries, even if they're not based in that country? What would they look for specifically in the CV or the motivational letter? Or is it the same? Is it really doesn't matter, where someone is applying from?
So I have to take the current situation with this because the market has changed. So what I've seen the last year due to COVID, it has become an issue on the working permit. So like one of the things is in the Netherlands, for example, if you're an EU citizen, I will look at it because companies are at this moment not prepared to sponsor sometimes, and I see it going up when it comes to requirements of Dutch, where the same vacancy I saw a year ago didn't require Dutch. So, those are the things that stand out, but it's mentioned in the vacancy. When it comes to vacancy that doesn't mention this at all, there's really no difference. I do think you need to showcase how soon you are available. So how soon are you ready to relocate? So I think that is important. Like, okay, if I'm going to go interview you, can you be here in 2 months or not? And instead of having that branding, like, oh, this person is in the US, that's when you call them and say, hey, I'm here, let's say I'm in the US, but I'm immediately available. I can be there in a month, and that's it. But then make that call, have that contact recruit before you apply.
Makes sense. What about leadership style? We're talking sometimes about more senior positions where you're going to be required to lead teams. So it's less about your functional and technical capabilities and more about your inspirational, your team building, change management. When you're asked to describe your leadership style, what are some things that people should consider about how they're describing it? Are there any pointers that you give? Because that's obviously a big part of our MBA programs as well, is developing and enhancing leadership style and identifying what your leadership style is. So any thoughts around how you can bring in leadership style into the conversation? It doesn't have to be a CV or a motivational letter, but how can someone bring that in to the conversation?
So Brandon, just to be sure, is it in the conversation or the process before?
I think it can be either. I think just where, how can you communicate about it? What places can you drop it in?
Yeah.
I think there's a time and place for everything.
Yeah, I think great question, because I did forget to mention during this webinar is that the best case to show your leadership is other people talking about your leadership. That means recommendations on LinkedIn. So when you're in leadership position, I expect when I'm recruiting you, check your CV, check your LinkedIn, and I immediately go to recommendations. And I expect you to have one other client, maybe if you have external clients of your team, members that you led, and maybe even, depending on which position you're into now, the senior board or, C-level management. So I think that's the most important. Don't talk about your leadership. Let others tell what's so great about your leadership style, and how you showcase that. That is an important one. It's really defining, Brandon, what you say. We have personal leadership development, in the MBA, because that's a very important thing. You need to know first, okay, how do I lead? And that's how you showcase it. And it starts with, how do I lead and why is this my style? And that's important. So do your research first. I cannot advise you how to showcase it. I think the biggest advice, know what kind of leadership style you have.
That's excellent. Here's an interesting question asking about, should a person mention their personal reasons for why they're applying for a position, or should they only stick with strictly professional reasons? So if I grew up really enjoying, Tony's chocolate only chocolate bars and I saw the roll, or my dying grandfather used to give it to me when I was a kid. Should we include personal things? And if yes, at what stage? And if not, why not?
I think whatever fits you and the industry. So let me say this. If in certain industries, and I'm just going to put it out there, banking and finance roles, depending on the company, they're not looking for that. Consultancy also not. They're looking for a straight cut through. Why are you great for this job? What can you bring to the team? And yeah, you can add a personal touch to it. When these massive brands are really looking for, and everyone at this moment, any company says they're purpose driven, right? And I'm saying this because everyone says that. But you will know which companies, really showcase and brand themselves as purpose driven. And those companies are looking for a personal story. They don't want to hear because you're the, biggest company in sportswear or, been there, done that. Give me a personal story about, let's say, your first Nike sneakers and you still have them, or that the first Nike sneakers, how did they make you feel? So, these kind of companies do really want that personal story, but in the end of the day, it's your brand. So if you're that kind of person that wants to share that, you should do it now. Because during interviews, there will be a mismatch in your environment, and then you'll be searching for a job within 9 months again or a year.
Yeah, you'll be miserable if you get the job even.
Yeah, so the most important is stick to yourself. And I mean, this webinar is about, how can you do it? But if there's things, these are not the rules. This is how I look at it. And if you don't feel that, then don't. So that's an important one to know.
Here's an interesting question. Can you include graphs and tables as part of your cover letter or CV, or is that kind of a no-no?
So you see me going like this because I personally don't like graphs and tables, but I'm a coach. So I think that's also different. I do like when you have graphs and tables as an add-on. Let's say you have your CV and you have a PowerPoint slide where you showcase that, So then I have the choice to just look at your CV and need any add-ons, I will click on that. But if it's part of your CV, I just feel sometimes that, let me say that for all the CVs I've seen in my career, I have a handful of them that I would say it made sense to put a graph in there. So if it makes sense, yes, but a lot of them didn't when I saw them.
So it sounds like have a really good reason. I mean, that goes for anything, I guess, you put on your CV because you have such limited space. I guess the other question would be, what things are you going to be giving up by including a graph or a chart because you're giving up valuable real estate on a CV. Yeah. Here's a fun one. This person asks, how can you know the one thing that no one else in the team has? So maybe it's your unique selling proposition if you don't even know the team, right? So you're assuming that what you have is something that they don't have. And so maybe you shouldn't assume it's what you have that they don't. Maybe it should be, what do you bring to the table? But how would you respond to someone who's asking, how can I, know what the team needs if I don't know the team?
Ask, do your research network. So maybe you don't know the specific team, but if you know someone in a company that's in the same, division or department, you can ask things. So I think that as soon as you want to apply, you're too late. If you're applying, then you won't, and it's all assumptions. If you really want to make that match, then you should know someone in the organization already. Reach out to them. Hey, I see this position. Do you know the department? Could you connect me with someone that knows more about it before you send it out? So I think that's really important. And for all of you calling in today and being here today, write down like your top positions you want to go for or the companies, and start to, already on LinkedIn tomorrow, reaching out to people like, hey, I think I'm interested in this company. I want to know more. So start now. One of the VPs that speaks, on campus or virtually now at RSM, one of the VPs of Unilever once said that her top tip is be prepared when an opportunity comes. She said, and this is where she was successful because she was always prepared when an opportunity presented themselves. And if the opportunity presents on LinkedIn and you're not prepared yet, then you're missing that opportunity right there.
And LinkedIn is such a powerful tool. I mean, you can find out so much about people, because the opportunities now to post media files and to post, papers. You can see the kinds of topics people are commenting on. Maybe it doesn't help necessarily with the recruiter, But as you're finding out who you're interviewing, obviously that's an easy one to do. But as you're doing your research on the company, I think oftentimes people, again, don't do a lot of the preparation. If you're going for a really cool job that you're really excited about, there's probably 50 other people sitting behind their laptops thinking the same thing. So it might take something extra. So you will have to put in the extra effort if you want to go for those competitive jobs. At least that's sort of the view that I have anyway. Maybe I'm out of touch with that, but.
Well, Brandon, I think that LinkedIn, to highlight that, there was a question on, if you don't have anything in the industry yet, and, you're really making this double, triple jump, as I call it. So you're changing countries, function, and location, a triple jump. Brand yourself on LinkedIn as this expert. And how do you do that? Share content on the subject, share content on the industry. What will happen is that your network, after seeing a few posts, will actually assume that you know more about this subject. So, and that's the neuroscience behind it. When I see, you, Brandon, posting things on, about recruitment, about leadership, then I'm like, hey, I don't know, let me talk to Brandon. He posts a lot on leadership and how you should present yourself, and I will reach out to you.
Which is great because you know me and I know nothing about leadership. So it just goes to show.
I know.
Make it till you make it, people. That's the moral.
That's definitely the moral.
That is the moral of that story. How about this one? We talked about, doing your homework, trying to get referrals or work through the network. How does the recruiter know that I was recommended for a role? Can I ask my contact, to give advice on the application? So in other words, if, you have a referral into the company, but there's being, an external recruitment or even an internal recruiter, how can you make sure that the world knows that you have a connection with this company?
So there's two ways. Some companies have a referral system. So, someone says, I can refer you. They have to put in the referral on your name. So a recruiter will see immediately that you're referred by. When this doesn't happen, even external recruiters could have that connection with the company. If not, mention their name in the cover letter. Because if you say, after talking to Brandon about this position, I truly know that I'm the right match for this. And then you start talking about, but name drop it, or based on my discussion with this person recommended me to apply. So I think those are really important things. So name drop it in the cover letter.
Excellent. So a lot of jobs require that you showcase or can demonstrate your experience. So having demonstrable experience. How can you showcase in a brief CV, the demonstration part of what your skills are and what your experience is without getting into a lot of details, right? Because we're talking about finding that balance between, giving enough so that you want to learn more about the candidate, but not so much that you don't want to read a novel. So how do you strike that balance, and how can you demonstrate the skills and experience that you have?
The easiest way to do this is very pragmatical. You show your CV to someone that doesn't know anything about the industry or whatever, and then you show it to someone, a friend of yours, and just says, like, what kind of questions do you have here? And if those questions are, questions that intrigue the person, then you're at the right level. The worst thing you can do is write everything in a bullet point, because it's easier for me to just say, oh no, this is not the right person. Just give enough info to make me think, hey, I need to know more. So as soon as you give a CV to someone and they take 15 minutes and you really ask them a favor, like, could you go through it and see if you have any questions, see what questions pop up. And if there are none, then you're already showcasing too much. Or the person doesn't feel like reading your CV, so select a good person in your network.
Find a better friend, I guess, is
exactly
what you should say there. Here's a question about LinkedIn recommendations, and this is one that we get a lot. Do they matter? Do they not matter? Do they matter to a recruiter? Do they not matter? Do you even scroll that far down on the profile? What are your thoughts about LinkedIn recommendations?
Yes, they matter. Short question. Short answer. Yes, they matter. I see your CV. If you apply for, if I'm an in-house recruiter and you apply, I see your CV. I immediately go to your LinkedIn. Already saw your CV, so I just scroll down recommendations. And what companies are you following at the moment? So where is your interest, right? You can follow certain companies or certain groups. That's what I will be looking into.
Okay. So be sure to reach out and get your recommendations. Preferably not all at once, because then your boss will know that you're doing something.
And don't get recommendations and give them also, because then it looks like, because I can see who did you recommend and who recommended you. So make sure, don't do that.
You take more than you give, I guess, is what you should be saying there. What if you're a person who has entrepreneurial or freelance work, between jobs? So maybe you're in the creative space, you worked for an agency as an art director, you did your own thing for 6 months, a year, and for whatever reason, you jump back into the agency life. How do you bring that in? This person saying, does it make you look like a flake? Does it make you look, what do you, when you see those kind of things on a CV, do you think anything of it? Do you just sort of say, yep, okay, this person, what's your take on that?
I think at the moment, the current state is that entrepreneurs and freelancers are adding a lot to companies. You know what I mean? So you have to be quick on your feet. You have to work with uncertainties. So it shows a lot of skills. So I think nowadays, other companies are very open to actually hire entrepreneurs because, they are really looking for this. So no, definitely not a flake. And if you feel you are, then, rethink how you wouldn't feel like a flake. But no, definitely an add-on for me personally.
So here's a question asking about personal brand in relationship to the fit of a company. So there's a lot of talk about having the right fit, but this is something that, in particular, this person says that Dutch recruiters seem to want a lot of. So how do you showcase in your CV or your motivation letter that you are indeed the right fit for a company?
I'm just thinking like the right fit. The right fit for the company, and that's the thing, the right fit should be about, how do you position yourself? So how does your layout already? So I will tell you, if you're applying for Nike right now, it shouldn't be the same layout as if you're applying for, let's say, ING. Different. And just on the layout. So that's the fit that they're looking for when we're talking about recruiters immediately. When it's the right fit is about people. It's not about, the first selection is based on experience and your first, the 30 seconds. So it's experience versus what you're showcasing. The right fit will only show during interviewing. And I think, this is really on the personal branding at the beginning. When you're there, be real.
Be real.
Be real, yeah.
Does it matter to you whether someone has, 500 plus connections or 50 connections? Does that matter when you're looking at the profile?
No, not really. Just thinking about it, 50 maybe I would be a bit, but no.
You are. I mean, if you're fresh out of school applying, or you're early in your career having 50 to 100, you probably these days, you probably have 50 or 100 people you went to college with or university with, but so it doesn't really play that much, I guess, is what you're saying, or?
No, that doesn't play. I think I should share what recruiters see when they're recruiting via LinkedIn. Of course, recruiters have a LinkedIn account. So what they can see is, so let's say I'm recruiting for a certain company. I can see in the company that I'm recruiting for, how many people are you connected with in my company? How does your profile look like in comparison to other people in this specific area of the company? So you can see that. And are you identifying with my company and the brand? That means, are you following my company? Are you following certain subjects that are dear to the company? So the recruitment tool, I can really recruit on, this time I want to recruit someone that identifies with the brand, is very active on LinkedIn, because, those are things that will show if you're available. Are you active on LinkedIn? Are you sharing content? So those are important things that recruiters select on.
This one, I don't know if this is necessarily recruitment based, but maybe from your coaching perspective, what do you suggest to someone who left on bad terms with their previous company, or maybe they were made redundant, as this person is saying, and you want to apply for a similar position afterwards? So maybe you were a project manager in company X, for whatever reason, made redundant. Now you're looking for project management roles in other companies. How do you do damage control? What do you talk about? What do people? Is it a common question if they see that you stopped working, that they say, well, why did you leave? Is that a common question? And if so, how should someone address that? Especially if the relationship isn't good, and yeah, how would you recommend someone address that?
So, yes, that's a question that a lot of people ask. Even if you're in a position, it's like, what's the reason you're applying for another thing, you know? So redundancy is very normal. And I'm talking, well, in the Netherlands specifically, you can even, I was made redundant, or I choose to, sometimes you can also have the choice, like, am I staying or not? When you're in bad terms, just make sure that it's about you and you can name it. Like, I didn't agree with the leadership style, and then be prepared to say, okay, what was the leadership style then? What happened there? Don't talk, don't embarrass the employer. That's the only thing. Like, don't go that way. So I think you can be real. And I think that's a very important thing. The frustration, I think, number one from recruiters or any hiring managers, is when you're a perfect candidate. Like, oh yeah, no, I don't have weakness, or the weaknesses, but my weakness is actually, build up my strengths, and everyone will be like, just be real. So also in this, you can be honest about it, but just be politically correct, because that's a test. Like, how are you going to deal when you don't, in our company, when something happens like this, if you don't agree with a call that leadership made?
Excellent. So I'm going to kind of bundle a couple of questions that have been coming in around academics and actually around the EMBA. And so these are legitimate questions. This is not me inserting these into the conversation. So in the eyes of the recruiter, which has more value, a full-time MBA or a part-time MBA? Which matters more in the long run? Paired with the question of, as you go up the corporate ladder, does work experience matter more than academic experience? So what are your thoughts? Of course, I have thoughts on the full-time EMBA part. I'll let you go first. But also with the work experience versus academic experience. And maybe there's a differentiation between undergraduate experience and postgraduate experience. But what are your thoughts on that? How would you respond to that?
I would respond to anyone that I'm in contact with on C-level management has an MBA. So to be fair, I don't know if they got the MBA while they were already in the C-level management position, or they had to get that before going in there. But everyone I've been in contact with has an MBA. Executive MBA, I'm going to leave that in the middle. Mostly executive MBA, because they're in a career and they want to progress in their career, so they do a part-time one. When it comes to academic versus work experience, I think it's really important to know where you're making that jump, right? So what you see is, if you're an engineer right now, or you have a PhD, and you want to go into corporates and a completely industry-wise, you want to change, but also function-based, then I see people doing an MBA to explain that transition and build business acumen to actually speak the language and really, bring their game when they're hired. So that's what I see. Making a choice, I think that's it. It really depends. So I hope I've answered the question a bit.
I think it definitely depends on the industry and depends on the level of the role, the kinds of things you're being required to do. For full-time versus a part-time program, it's really about where you are in your career. Typically we see those people who are looking to do a lot of career change and country change will typically do a full-time MBA. Because you come out of the workforce and oftentimes move from where you happen to be living at the moment. Whereas EMBAs tend to be more of a regional play. You stay in the current job that you're in, and you typically stay in an area that is nearby where you're living, just out of convenience sake. So to Deanna's point, it's just more about your personal circumstance. I think you should if you elect to do an MBA, you should do it for the reasons that you want to do. Not necessarily because you're looking to get a particular job afterwards, because there's never a guarantee that whatever you want to do afterwards is going to be there. So ultimately, you need to understand your why. And we talk a lot about that when we meet with candidates. Coming down the home stretch here, about 10 minutes left. And we'll wrap it up here in about 5 minutes so Lida can make a few last comments here. We talked about including skills or not. Two things. What about hobbies? Do we include hobbies? And what about designations? So if you have particular certifications, in every organization, designations are just a name, but responsibility is totally different. So do you include hobbies? And then, actually, let's do the hobby ones first. We'll come back to the designations in a second. Let's do the hobbies ones first.
I'm laughing because it's typically Dutch to do that. Like in the Dutch market.
You think so?
Like,
I thought people in the States do it too.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I thought it was really Dutch. So I get a lot of feedback back from people from Latin America that are doing MBA, and they're like, why do I have to put this here?
Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah. And I think, it should trigger something. So it's someone that had as a hobby, it wasn't even rock. It was something so different that I thought anyone is going to talk about this. But it has to be you again, Brandon. So I'm like, if you don't, if you feel like, well, I don't have a lot of hobbies, or, it's not really something that would add on, then don't. But it is very, for the Dutch market, is something that a lot of people put in there. Yeah.
When it comes to applications, I enjoy it typically because I'll start off with a softball question about that. One, to see if they're telling the truth. And usually it's an easy question because it's something they're theoretically passionate about. So, and different companies have different title structures. How can you make sure that, a director in one company is a VP in another, an SVP here might be a director there. And of course, obviously the title can sometimes play a role when you're quick screening. How do you approach, your title? I mean, you obviously you probably can't change it, but are there ways to work around that so that you're signaling, especially if it's a different industry? Are there ways that you can signal that?
You can change your title in the Netherlands. So, on a CV or whatever, it doesn't have to be the official title you have in a company. I know in other countries it's different, but in the Netherlands, so to give you an example, I had someone that was guru of customer journey experience. That was the official title of this person. In another industry, they would be like, okay, what is this? And there was a marketing manager, for the, marketing manager, but then specifically for the B2C market. What are you going to use? So I think that's it. So I would change it in the purpose of, someone else understanding what you're doing. So some companies are very creative. I'm a career development manager. I don't manage. I manage, but so I'm not managing people, and I'm a career development manager. So in my profile, I put career development manager. That's official, but also career coach, because that defines what I do. And that's what people understand, because no one will understand what a career development manager does. So I think that's important. So for the Netherlands, you can change your title. So be aware of that.
It's funny because the person that asked the question about sharing hobbies actually says, I'm from Brazil. And so they thought they were the only one that was doing that. So they never thought that Dutch people did that as well. So, hey, there's an aha moment.
Olá, Brasil.
Obrigado, huh? Yeah, very nice. You should have done this in Portuguese. You would have had at least one person who would have been with you.
Yeah.
Diana, thank you so much. We covered as many questions as we could. We had a lot of questions this evening. We answered easily over 30. In addition to your presentation. So first of all, thank you so much for just rapid fire answering questions. I hope that everyone on the call today gained some new insights and had some aha moments. I know I sure did. It goes to show that it's, looking for a job is a job. And if you're going to be successful, especially the higher you get and the more competitive those roles become, if they're at companies that are really popular and really of interest, you are going to have to work. There's just no way around it. Yes, you might get a stroke of luck. Maybe you have a rich uncle who is the CEO. But for most of us, we don't have that luxury. So you need to use the network you have at your disposal. You need to understand yourself. You need to really review what information you're sharing to make sure that you stand out. And, it's going to take time, and it is a little bit of trial and error. So, don't get discouraged if you're out there looking for roles and you're not getting callbacks right away. That's going to happen. Not every role that you apply for is going to be the best fit. So know yourself, be prepared to tell a good story about it, and understand the audience. I think those are some of the major takeaways that I got from this evening as well. I would like to thank Diana again for sharing her insight and for her time. I'd also like to thank everyone who's here on the call as well. Lida, I'll hand it back over to you to close everything out. I'll take you to the next screen so you can share some next steps. And I'm going to put myself on mute. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
That's great. So it is indeed time to wrap it up. I can't believe that time flew by so quickly. So from my side, thank you, Diana, as well. It was, as we've seen, one of the most popular sessions we've had, and it's great that we had you with us today. Thank you also, Brandon, to you as well for facilitating superbly the discussion. Yet again, we're already booking you as a moderator for our next event. And of course, thank you for everyone for being here today. As a next step, we will send you a follow-up email with a recording of the event and some additional information. We look forward to seeing you in our future events, which include the October 7th webinar on understanding your executive MBA admissions journey if you're interested in applying. We have a talk with executive MBA alumni on November 5th. And of course, if you are interested in next year's program, you can email me directly. The Associate Director of Admissions, Vasilis, and I are holding also Zoom sessions every Thursday at 5 o'clock. So we'd welcome you there as well. And of course, reach out to our executive MBA students and alumni, expand your network, as we discussed previously. So it was great having you. We hope that you enjoy the rest of the evening and hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you all so much. Have a nice night, and be sure to reach out to LinkedIn if you have any follow-up questions for any of us.